So this is our Romanian deadlift pattern, or RDL. It's a top-down deadlift. We reviewed this in previous videos. Big things we're looking for: vertical shins, butt reaching back across the room. We're trying to load up those hamstrings. We're trying to maintain a neutral spine and keeping those shoulders pulled down to the hips so we have those lats engaged, keeping that bar right over your center of mass. Here's an example of a little bit too much ankle flexion. So it's turning the movement instead of a hinge into more of a squat pattern. So ideally we'd want to keep those shins vertical and the hips up and back so we load those hamstrings. Now this movement is initiated at the spine instead of the hip. So we're getting a lot of flexion through that spine right now. And here's an example where that weight is a little too far in front of the center of mass. So the low back is going to do a lot more work here instead of keeping that bar right over the midfoot. And just to review, a good pattern: bar is over midfoot, neutral spine, and we're initiating that movement through the hips. So once we start adding some weight to the bar, we're going to have to pick this weight up off the floor. So we're going to use that using a conventional deadlift pattern. We'll go into more of this later, but I just want to show you an example of us picking the weight up off the floor using conventional stance first. We go all the way up. Generally, we start the count at the top, from the top down. So this would be rep number 1 versus the weight off the floor. That's kind of, think of it as like a free conventional deadlift rep. So if we were to work from the top down, think anti-shrug the shoulders. So think pull the shoulders down to your hips. That's going to keep your lats engaged. Pull that bar into your body so it keeps the bar right over your center of mass. Push those hips back first, so you're initiating the movement at the hips, keeping those shins vertical. That'll keep the tension on the hamstrings, and when you're coming up, squeeze the glutes through. So like we showed earlier, here is a poor example where we're initiating the movement at the back, or the thoracic spine, versus the hips. And it gets that weight kind of like, it puts a lot more stress through the lower back and upper back through this movement versus loading up the hamstrings and the hips. And again, here's a good position. We're reaching those hips up and back, keeping those shins vertical, and maintaining a neutral spine throughout the movement. So here it is from the front. We're going to do a conventional deadlift off the floor, pulling that bar into the body, a little tension out on the knees, and leveraging that weight up and back. So we're starting the rep here, pulling that bar into the body. You can see creating a little tension on the outside of those knees. And what we're doing is we're keeping those hips engaged throughout the range of motion of the movement. That's going to load up those hamstrings more and allow us to use the glutes. Here's an example where we're not really engaging the hips at all. You can see those knees are kind of collapsing a little bit. A lot of times you just don't think of it, but we want to keep those hips engaged throughout the entire range of motion of the movement. So again, here we are, little tension outwards, leveraging that bar up off the floor. And from the top down, we're creating a little tension on the outside of those hips, making sure that they're engaged throughout the entire range of motion of the movement. Again, we're pulling that bar into the body, neutral spine, a little tension out on the hips. Now that we have the basics of some of the Romanian deadlift mechanics down, we're going to go into conventional deadlift mechanics off the floor. So the consistent theme here is we want to maintain a neutral spine throughout the movement. So you can see we're anti-shrugging those shoulders, keeping those lats engaged before coming up off the floor. That's going to help keep that spine in a neutral position. Now, we're going to have a slight forward shin angle here, but we want to keep the hips up nice and high so we can leverage that weight up off the floor. Again, pull that bar into your body, lats are engaged, leveraging that weight up off the floor, and glutes are squeezing through. And finally, you're returning the bar to the floor just like you would in a Romanian deadlift. Hips go back first, keeping a neutral spine. Now, ideally, we don't want to round the spine first while initiating the movement. So you can see right here, we're initiating the movement with a rounded thoracic spine. Now, you can get away with this until you can't, but it's not something we recommend. Here's an example of where we're bending a little too much at the ankles, or flexing a little too much at the ankles, turning and moving into a squatting pattern. Again, not as efficient. We want to load up those hamstrings and get most of this movement out of the glutes. And again, here we are from the front, initiating that movement off the floor. Pull that bar into the body, little tension out on the knees, and we're leveraging that bar up and back. Again, anti-shrug those shoulders, get those lats engaged, and pull the bar into your body as you leverage it up. And so here's an example of how those knees are kind of collapsing a little bit. We went through this in the RDL pattern. Hips are not engaged. What's going to happen is you're going to come forward a little bit, and you probably feel a little bit more at your lower back, or maybe even upper back is going to compensate quite a bit instead of keeping that load on the hips. And again, good position. We're pulling that bar into the body, little tension out against those hips, leveraging the bar up off the floor.